Hello, I'm Steve Doty with the Washington Examiner, and I'm here with our senior investigative reporter, Richard Pollock. Richard, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Richard is the author of Obama You Don't Know, the 10-part series through the Washington Examiner. And Richard, I'd like to start off talking about this piece by just asking you, why did the Washington Examiner decide to do a story on President Obama's background?
Well, I think that all of us are very interested in the background, the history, the lessons and character of either our forthcoming presidents or our presidents. You know, every school child learns about George Washington cutting down the cherry tree and that he could not tell a lie. These kinds of character-building anecdotes and stories really give us an insight as to who these people are. What kinds of people are they? What kinds of presidents might they be? What kinds of values they bring to the Oval Office? And I think that that is really what we wanted to do. We wanted to review objectively, factually, what was the background of Barack Obama.
And through that background, you started with the president's childhood and his upbringing. Let's start with that. What, if you would just describe what it was like. Where did he come from? Where was he born?
Well, you know, it was very interesting because the narrative prior to actually doing this, this profile was that he came from an impoverished third world country, that he was really disadvantaged in many, many ways. And I think that that was really the popular understanding. So the first thing I did was I took a look at one of the third world countries that he lived in with his mother, and that is in Indonesia and in Jakarta. And he lived with his mother and his second father, stepfather, in a neighborhood in Jakarta. And this was my first introduction to sort of like fact and fiction about Barack Obama.
And that neighborhood, Menteng, I believe it's called, what was it like?
Well, you know, when we have this idea of living in an impoverished third world country, we think about struggle and difficulty. And so I was actually interested, so I immediately Googled it and I went to Wikipedia about Menteng, which is this neighborhood. And what I discovered is it is the most exclusive neighborhood in all of Jakarta. That two former presidents live there, that most of the generals and officers live there, that the expat community and oil executives live there. It was really closer to sort of like the Georgetown of Washington, D.C. than perhaps Anacostia, which is really the poor part of town. And that really struck me as really a shock because I had the idea that he was struggling in Indonesia. And in fact, what I discovered was he lived a very good life. In fact, the house that he lived in Menteng was a house that had a servant's quarters, which I found very interesting.
Certainly not the hardship and the poverty that the president may have portrayed early on in his campaign while running for president.
It went totally contrary to the whole image that we have about Barack Hussein Obama, that he came from a very, very impoverished and disadvantaged background. And what I discovered was, as you follow his upbringing and his childhood and his youth, that privileged position actually continued.
Let's talk about his schooling now. What was it like? Was it a poor school? Was he an outcast? Was it maybe among the richer schools in the area?
Well, the first thing is that his mother brought him to Hawaii, where his grandparents lived, and his grandparents decided to bring him up to raise him. And he went to the most exclusive prep school in all of Hawaii. The Hawaii of all of the political elite, of all the financial and business elite, and it was on a lush plantation in Hawaii, and the children of the most privileged families on the island were his classmates.
His classmates, what were they like toward President Obama? Were they nice to him? Was he an outcast? Was he kind of somewhere in between?
Well, it's very interesting because there was a whole narrative, both in his autobiography as well as in interviews, that he had a difficult time at this particular school. In fact, he was the literary editor of the literary magazine. He was on the varsity basketball team. He was very popular in school. Most of his friends, who, by the way, they saw Barack Obama as, yes, an African American who was in Hawaii, but one of the things about Hawaii is that it has many different mixtures of races. I mean, it has a lot of Asians and Japanese. It has native Hawaiians there, as well as others who might be European or white Caucasian. It was really a potpourri of all sorts of different types of backgrounds, ethnicities, etc. So it sounds like when you actually talk to, and I've done an awful lot of reading and to a certain extent interviewing of people who were familiar with him that time, he was a pretty good student and very nicely integrated in the school.
The school was certainly a melting pot, and it seems like President Obama, from what you described, fit in very nicely. Now, I want to fast forward a little bit in his educational career. Let's get to law school at the University of Chicago. Now, what did you find that was maybe most interesting during your reporting?
Well, the first thing is, which actually surprised many people say he was a professor of law. He was not. He was a lecturer, which is sort of an adjunct faculty member. But the other issue was the popular conception of Barack Obama was that he was a star professor, that there were a tremendous number of professors out there that really struck out, and he was among the giants there. And what I discovered was the first 2 years he was he was there for 12 years, and for the first 2 years of his time there, he did have some popularity as a professor or as a lecturer. But as the years went by, the student evaluations of which I was able to read show that he really fell into the middle ground as a faculty member. And that really surprised me. And in fact, it was a little difficult to actually get some of the information from the university about these student evaluations.
From your understanding and from your reporting, was he engaged with the students? Was he engaged with the faculty? Or was he kind of on the outside, just doing a lecture here and a lecture there?
This was very surprising to me because, we have heard about what an intellectual Barack Obama is, how engaged he is in deep intellectual thought. And so I actually expected him not only to be a star in the classroom, but to also be a star on campus. And what I discovered in talking to many of the professors at the University of Chicago Law School is that he was really absent. That was the most important feature. He was aloof. He was not engaged with campus life. He never participated in any of the major events on campus. He never attended a single major lecture, including by either Supreme Court or federal judicial figures at the university. He never was involved in moot court. He never was involved in any of the student lectures. He was really absent. He would go to the classroom, he would talk to the students, and he would leave. He was a state senator at the time in the southern part of the state, and so he would leave immediately from there and go down to the southern part of the state. And so disengaged is really what I heard over and over again in terms of being a faculty member at the university. Was
that maybe the most surprising thing about your reporting at his time at the University of Chicago Law School, that he was so disengaged with the students and the faculty?
I found that extraordinary. I just thought it was amazing that he would be so uninvolved in the cultural life and in the academic life of the law school. And the other piece of it was that I thought he was a constitutional lawyer, and it turns out he never really taught constitutional law. He taught what's called due process law, which is a whole other kind of thing. But the most surprising thing was, we think of universities as being open and transparent, and it was very difficult for me to get the student evaluations. It was really sort of a closed kind of process, and then when I actually went there to the campus, they actually had like a minder sitting with me to make sure, I guess, I didn't run away with any of these particular documents. And there was an aloofly notebook, and so maybe I could have walked away with it, and they checked all my stuff, and they were really quite nervous about me being there.
And now, from what I understand, the Washington Examiner and you yourself were one of the only ones who took a dive into these student evaluations and his time at the University of Chicago Law School.
I was one of only 2 reporters, according to the university, that actually looked at them. The other one was the New York Times, and they wrote really a glowing piece about his professorship or his faculty member position at the university. Even I just sort of get caught in calling him professor. He was a faculty member in good standing, but he was not a full professor, even an adjunct professor.
Okay, well, thank you, Richard. Now, coming up after the break, we'll take a look at President Obama's time in Chicago outside of law school and some of the people that he met.